Hey everybody, welcome. Let's talk a little bit about what loops are, how you write a loop in Python, and what exactly we would go and we would use these things for. So the basic idea of loops is to make your life easier. It is something that takes a chunk of code and repeats it multiple times based on your needs. So an example for this would be in our number guess game. If we wanted to keep people guessing until they guessed it right, we would use a loop so we wouldn't have to write an infinite number of if statements to cover every possible solution. So the loops are very, very handy for that sort of a situation and for many other. So another good example is that if you have, like, for example, a spreadsheet of data and you want to process it, like when I send emails, you would go and you would loop through all of the lines of the spreadsheet. So you write code once, not, for example, 900 times. That's just not reasonable. So loops are used to simplify that process. Those are the general idea of what we would use a loop for. Let's talk about the how. So to set up our code in here, we're going to just start with a random. Oops. And we're going to see that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just generate one random number. Between, we'll say 1 and 10. And then we'll just print out our random like we have before. Real nice and simple like that. So that's just a simple basic little chunk of code that we've done probably a few different times, maybe more. Just to run it real quick, we're good. So now that's great if you want one random number, but let's say you want more than one. So if you want to print out multiple, what we can do is we can use a couple of different loops. The most simple one would be a for loop that we could run and do this thing a certain number of times. So I'm going to give you a little brief look at a couple of different things that you can possibly use. So this site is W3 Schools. I use this a lot for web design. That's really what it started out as being, is a tutorial site for web design. As it turns out, this also has Python included as well. So if you're ever stuck, you're like, I have no idea what to do, you can go to this W3 School site, or really just Google a whole bunch of different, or like Google it in Python, not Python, in Google. And then you can probably find all of the things that you need in this, in one, or in this. For us, we do only the basic things. You can find all that stuff in here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use this 4x in range sort of situation. Just like this, and we're going to say that we want to generate 10 random numbers. Yep, that looks good. I always go back and just double check to make sure. So now, if we use this code that we've generated here, as opposed to putting it outside of our loop, if we do Control X and cut it, and we put it inside of our loop right here, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of generating one random number, we'll generate 10. So all of that with just really one line of extra code. Now, how the loops work is just like this. It's just like an if statement. What you have to do is, opposed to putting the things you want to loop through, you have to put them one tab in. So remember, tab keys on the left. The 4x in range has to be on the left side. The R and the print have to be over on the one tab in from the left. So that's kind of the syntax. That's how you write it. And that's a good example of how you would use for loop to accomplish a task. So now there's multiple different types of loops in Python. This 4x in range is definitely something that is one way to go. So there's another variation of this. So we can say for x in range between 1 and 10. And then what we're going to do in this case is we're just going to print x. So we have, in this case, what have I done? Technical difficulties. Please hold. My apologies. I guess I hit the back button and screwed everything up. Okay, so this is what you would get here, is that you would get our random numbers, and then you would get a count between 1 and 9. So when we're doing this loop right here, notice that the number 10 is not included in this loop. So this will start at 1 and finish at 9 as opposed to 10. Let's do one quick thing so we can just kind of differentiate what is what. We're just going to do a quick little print statement with like little dashes here. And what that's going to do is that's just going to go and it's going to separate the randoms from the count right there. So now the benefit of doing this is kind of similar, right? But the benefit of doing this is if you want to go from like 30 to 50 with just one simple little change like that, you can see that you added all of this counting from 30 to 49 in addition to our randoms. So that's the benefit of this, is that you can change the range. The X in range, when you just put one number, is going to go from 1 to 10. That's what it's going to do. So those are two examples of our for loop. For loops are very, very functional. When I write a lot of for loops just because I think they're the most useful in the most different situations. So now there are different kinds of loops. And if you check back to W3 Schools, you can see that the while loop is a different type of loop. So the while loop is an example here, is something that you would use in certain situations where for maybe wouldn't be the most appropriate, specifically if you don't know when a loop is going to end. So this is a good example right here of a while loop and how you would write it. So with while, as opposed to just being able to say for x and range, all that stuff, you first have to declare a variable. And we're just going to call this one count. And we're going to run our loop while our count is less than 10. So now there's two parts right here. We're just going to print our count right here. And the most important thing is that you don't forget to change the variable. The particular situation that you run into in this is that if you make a loop that never ends, you have a substantial problem. So if you don't forget to make count go up by 1, your loop will never end. And then when we're done, we'll just print done, just so we can see where that is. And as we did before here, we're going to put our little dashes up here between our count and our for loop, just so we can differentiate. Also one thing, so we don't have 50 things printing out. Let's just change that to 30 and 35. So all that is just to kind of, oh, goodness gracious, I just messed that up again. Can you believe it? Technical difficulties once again. All right, technical difficulty solved. I'm used to in web design hitting the refresh button. That's kind of why that all happens. So when we run this, we'll see our 30 to 34 print out. And then the same sort of situation prints out for our while loop, where we change our count and we see our count printing out like that. So one of the particular situations where you can do this is you can combine this print statement and you can combine if statements in here, and you can exit your loop early. So let's say we want to just kind of fake this thing out. So if our count is, we'll say 5, what we'll do is we'll just reset our count to be 11. So we'll exit our loop. So you can use if statements in here, and let's say you don't, this is not a great example of where it would be. So you can see count the last time is actually 11. And that would be one way we would use a loop. So this is an example of how loops work. This is the couple of different kinds of loops that you might see. Use this as notes. Keep this handy. So if you do forget, you can go refer back to this. You can always, like I said, refer to W3 Schools as well. That is a important skill where knowing where to find your information is almost as important as knowing it in the first place. So good luck. Please submit this, and I will see you for another video at some point, possibly in the future.